Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Kulbhushan Chandel from Himachal Pradesh University Shimla. Today we are going to talk on module Recipient of Change from paper Organizational Change and Development. Let me discuss that what we are going to learn from this module. We will be knowing how the people respond to change. We will be studying the reasons for negative reactions occurring to change. We will be studying the changes in organizations at individual level. We will be studying the changes in organizations at group levels. And we will also be studying the changes in organizations at larger system level. The models of organization change and the analysis suggested are from the perspectives of the managers who are making the change to happen. However, the reality of our lives is that we are probably more often on the receiving end and the recipient of the change. This module deals with the understanding of the reactions of recipients of change and the change agents in corporation to improve their change plans. It deals with the reality of those who find themselves on the receiving end of change. It will consider the different reactions to change, support for change, mixed feelings towards change, and resistance to change. An organization is a totality comprising of interacting parts and components. To change a part of organization does not constitute organizational change. Organizational change is useful to analyze, to examine the various parts and how they affect and are affected by each other and by the whole. For understanding organizational change thoroughly, it is critical to consider the multiple perspectives as the process is so complex. There are two types of changes: evolutionary change and revolutionary change. Although there is overlap between the two, separating them which helps us to understand more clearly that organization change occurs quite differently depending upon what to change, like change for improving operations is to be made, or change in entirely new direction which is to be made. In this module, we would study the three perspectives: individual level, group level, and total system. How do people react to change? Many managers assume that resistance is inevitable in change situations. It is the time to dismiss. Resistance does not always react negatively, and in many situations they will react positively. Many questions will also be raised, and they are thinking individuals. They try to make sense out of the change and its impact. This questioning is perceived as resistance, but not necessarily the same. Often, if the resistance arises, it does so when the recipients resolve their mixed feelings. If they conclude that the benefits to them clearly outweighs the costs and consequences have high personal relevance and are consistent with their attitudes and values, support is highly likely. It is also suggested that resistance to change is a term that has lost its usefulness because it oversimplifies the matter and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the change leaders assumes that resistance will occur, it becomes more likely. Change leaders should focus on trying to understand why people react to the change as they do and how those reactions are likely to evolve over time. When changes are introduced, recipients often find themselves pulled in different directions. Conflicting messages are often delivered by friends, relatives, co workers, subordinates, and managers and are so influential in opinion formulations. If things becomes polarized around the change, people who have come to a decision may view those who are of different opinion with suspicion and disapproval. The mixed feeling that many feel can be magnified by the concerns about the impact of the change on the relationship with others, their ability to do what is asked of them, the fit with their needs and their values and their future prospects. These concerns are enhanced by the lack of confidence that matter and that can be resolved positively and produce the intended results. When the recipients see themselves as relatively powerless, a variety of undesirable coping responses, including alienation, passivity, sabotage, and turnover may result. The perceptions of costs and benefits of change depends on what people are concerned about, what they have experienced in the past, and what they think they know. Sometimes small changes may produce strong responses in one group due to perceived consequences, whereas much more significant changes will produce mild reactions in another group due to perceptions that the impact on them will not be important. Why do negative reactions occur to change? Change leaders undertake an initiative because they believe that the benefits will outweigh their costs. However, the recipients of change, those on the receiving end, may have a very different perspective. They may feel imposed upon and unprepared or see themselves and their co-workers as negatively affected by the changes. They may perceive risks to the organizations, see problems with the initiative of change, and may mistrust the change leaders. Following can be the causes of negative reaction to change. Negative consequences outweigh the benefits. The communication process is faulty, leading to confusion and doubt. There is concern that the change has been ill conceived and insufficiently tested or may have adverse consequences that are not anticipated. The recipient lack experience with change and its implications or have habituated approaches that they rely on or remain committed to. The recipient have had prior negative experience with a similar change. The negative reactions of peers, subordinates, and supervisors also influence the views. The change process is seen to be lacking justice. Negative reactions to change. Concern and negative reactions towards change for a variety of reasons. First, perception concerning the negative consequences of the change may simply be true. The change may be fundamentally incongruent with the things the recipient value about their jobs or workplace. The loss of work is likely the most extreme form of this. Second, the communication process can be flawed and the recipient may be left feeling ill informed. Support is likely to be less when people feel they lack the information they need to make an informed judgment. Third, the recipient may have serious doubt about the impact and effectiveness of the change, and they may be concerned that the change initiative has not been sufficiently studied and tested. Fourth, recipients may react negatively because they lack experience with change and are unsure about its implications. When the conditions in an organization are stable for a longer period of time, even modest changes can seem threatening. Fifth, recipients may have negative experience with the change initiatives that seem similar to the one being advocated. Sixth, they may have had negative experience with those who are advocating change. They may mistrust the judgment of the change leaders and their ability to deliver the promise. Seventh, recipients may be influenced by the negative reactions of peers, subordinates, and managers who they trust. The opinion leaders have significant impact. There may also be justice related to concerns. Recipients may see the process as lacking in the procedural justice. In summary, the resistance is one of the responses to change initiative. Is the resistance which is based on the different views of consequence. The reasons need to be understood and change plans to be modified. Changes in organizations at individual level. Changes at the individual level are designed and implemented to facilitate, to help the organization to move in its new directions. This assumption is critical to our understandings. Most changes at individual level in organizations are not in the service of moving the total system in a new direction. For example, training programs are conducted because another competitor in the industry is doing so and to remain in competition. The three primary change examples for individuals that can be in the service of helping to implement the organization change can be: 1. Recruitment, selection, placement and displacement. This category of individual change concerns getting, placing and keeping the right people in the right roles and jobs to facilitate the larger change efforts. Then training and development. Training programs are designed and conducted to help and to bring about organizational change. Most of time the effort is directed towards individuals in managerial positions. Then coaching and counseling. Counseling was recognized as a tool for individual development and organizational development at least 70 years before, when the Hawthorne studies were conducted, when counseling and coaching was used for purposes of furthering organizational change. We have the problem of integrating individual needs and organizational goals. Most of the time, coaching is provided informally with the internal organizational professionals. Changes in organization at individual level continued. These informal encounters may be carried out during conversations, briefs, and spontaneous talks with the managers. More recently, the executive coachings has been incorporated. Coaching occurs at all levels of organizations, but executive coaching has more elegance. Witherspoon and White have specified at least 4 different roles that executive has to play. That is coaching for the skills, coaching for performance, coaching for development, and coaching for executive agenda. Individual responses to organizational change. Individuals' reaction to significant change in organizations change that directly affect them has been linked to the psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross descriptions in the 5 stages that most people go through when they are faced with terminal illness. The struggle begins with shock and denial, moves to anger, to bargaining, and to attempt to postpone the inevitables, to depressions, and for the acceptance. Not everyone moves through all these stages. Some never moves beyond denial. Some organizational members fight the change to death, constantly denying that the change is necessary. Others embrace the changes readily and move with it. Most people are somewhere in between and move through all the stages. There are 3 ways to help organizational members to deal with change conceptually, then achieving closures and participations. The framework developed by William Bridges is an example. He has given 3 phases. 1. Ending and letting go. Then, second, going through the neutral zone, and finally, making a new beginning. He distinguished the change and transition. Change is something that starts and stops, or when something that used to happen in one way that start happening in another manner. Transition is a psychological process extending over a longer period of time and cannot be managed, unlike change. Changes in organizations at group level. The primary work group, whether it is a top management, packaging unit at plant level, or a district sales team, is the most important subsystem within an organization. The work group serves as the context and locus for interface between individual and organizations, primary social relationship and support of individual employees, whether he or she is a manager or not. A determination of the employee's sense of organizational reality, the extent to which members of group work well together, and the extent to which they work well with other groups in the organization will determine the overall effectiveness of the organization. Work groups have always been important for the organizational effectiveness. This importance is increasing. The single individual who knows many of the functions and specialties within an organization is becoming more and more rarity. Groups of various specialists attempting to produce something that is greater than the total of their individual specializes are becoming more the rule than exceptions. Newer the organization structure, such as the matrix design and network, requires an increase in group activities. Team building. Organization change efforts rely heavily on the use of work groups. These family units within the organization have to make changes in the way they conduct their work. Their unit's goals may need to be entirely different. Their roles within the unit may need to be modified, and so on. Conducting team building activities is often an activity in support of the larger organization change. Self-directed groups. It may be that as part of a larger change effort, management has decided to flatten the organization's hierarchy, that is, to eliminate the several layers of supervision. Organizational members need to learn more about how to manage themselves individually and in work unit. Then intergroup. Work units or groups in the organizations that are normally dependent on one another, such as marketing people working with operations people, research and development with manufacturing, and so on, will form time to time, experience problems and issues with one another. Each group has its own mission, but for their mission to the accomplished, each group occasionally depends on the others. Their mutual dependence is a natural setting of conflict. Group responses to organizational change. The more that work units in the organization are involved in helping to plan and implement change, the more they are likely to embrace rather than resist in the organizational change efforts. Resistance by organizational group can take many forms. That may be the protection and competition to change their units is to endanger a central and core competence of the organization, is an expression often heard from various organizational groups time to time. Changing alliances and ownership to avoid dealing with organization change, group may opt for becoming a separate entity, formally departing from parent organization. The demand for new leadership, distinction between the really and fake conflict. There are time and circumstances in which the group's leader is simply not capable of dealing with and leading the change effort. Under these conditions, the leader should be replaced. And finally, it makes sense to recompose the group, not changing its function necessarily, and it may be that new skills and technology are needed for a particular work unit to forward in support of the larger change effort. Changes in organizations at larger system level. An organization change efforts begins all at once with the total system, especially in a large organization. Beginning typically involves an individual group program such as management training or an already recognized need to make a significant change in the organization structure. In this, we have considered the interventions previously described as in examining the large system change, the orders of change, phases of large system change, change focus, and finally change at the interorganizational levels have been considered. Order of change. It is useful to think strategically about the different orders of change, as the change at the larger system is complex. At the first order change, it is within a subsystem, and although change in that unit will have some consequences for the larger system, the change within the initial subsystem will be short-lived. At the second order change, the target is a subsystem that is beyond the initial focus, but that will be affected if initial effort is successful. At the third order change, influences is on some organizational process or outcomes that are affected by multiple factors. Whether the interventions are made, the ultimate objective is larger to increase the productivity. Change phases. Levins, in his three-phase model of change, has explained the change at group level. He gave 3 phases as unfreeze, movements, and refreeze. At first phase, unfreeze the system. This unfreeze may take variety of forms like creating sense of urgency to need of change. The second phase is movement or changing the organization in new direction with different technologies and ways of operations. The third phase is rephrase, is initiated when the change is underway. Change focus. In this, the question arises are where do we start change? What comes next? And then where do we focus? The answer depends on what is initiating the change is from the organization's external environment. The focus should be on the purpose, mission, and related matters. The focus should be on all the matters such as organizational design, structure, and informational system. Then it is change process. In general, process here it is referred to the mechanism that facilitate the overall change efforts such as communication system and training programs that focus on the new skills and behaviors which are needed to make the change work. Then inter-organizational. There are a number of reasons for this. The opportunities to share resources that neither organization by itself has, and the opportunity to improve cost effectiveness by reducing redundancies. This is particular in case of mergers in which two organizations of relatively equal size and scope come together as well. System responses to organizational change. With strong efforts at planned process to bring about large-scale organization change, including heavy use of involvement and participatory activities, as well as clarity of direction with strong leadership, successful changes can occur. Let's summarize what we have learned in this module. The models of organization change and the analysis that is suggested are from the perspectives of the managers who is making the change to be happened. However, the reality of our lives is that we are probably more often on the receiving end, the recipients of change. This module tells us the understanding, the reactions of the recipients of change and the change agents in corporations to improve their change plans. It deals with the reality of those who find themselves on the receiving end of change. This module also tells us the different reactions to change which support the change, mixed feelings towards change, and resistance to change. It also tells that an organization is a totality comprising of interacting parts and components. To change a part of organization does not constitute organizational change. The organizational change is useful to analyze, to examine the various parts and how they affect and are affected by each other and by as a whole. For understanding organizational change thoroughly, it also shows that it is critical to consider the multiple perspectives as the process is so complex. Many managers assume that resistance is inevitable in change situation. It is the time to dismiss this myth. Resistance does not always react negatively, and in many situations they will react positively. Many questions will also be raised, and they are thinking individuals. They try to make sense out of the change and its impact. This questioning is perceived as a resistance, but not necessarily the same. often if the resistance arises, it does not when the recipients resolve their mixed feelings. If they conclude that the benefit to them clearly outweighs the costs and consequences, have high personal relevance, and are consistent with their attitudes and values, sport is highly likely. It is also suggested that resistance to change is a term that has lost its usefulness because it oversimplifies the matter and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Changes at the individual level are designed and implemented to facilitate, to help the organization to move in its new direction. This assumption is critical to our understanding. Most changes at individual level in an organization are not in the service of moving the total system in a new direction. For example, training programs are conducted because another competitor in the industry is doing so, and to remain in competition, the primary work group, whether it is a top management, packaging units at plant level or district sales team, is the most important subsystem within an organization, which should be trained also. This work group serves as the context and locus for the interface between individual and organizations. Primary social relationship and support of individual employee, whether he or she is a manager or not, a determination of the employee's sense of organizational reality. And organization change efforts begin at once with the total system, especially in a large organization. Beginning typically involve an individual, group, program such as management training, or an already recognized need to make a significant change in the organization structure. In this, we considered the interventions previously which have been described. In examining the large system change, we have considered the order of change, phases of large system change, change focus, and finally change at the inter-organizational level. We have considered organizational change from the perspective of levels of individuals, which includes interpersonals, that is group and larger system. Thank you.